Salam and welcome, dear viewers and listeners. Welcome back to the Radio Resistance podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, my dear co-host and brother Zoubair, as always. And today we're privileged and honored to have a guest with us who embodies the spirit of resistance through the power of truth-telling. Yes, today we're honored to welcome Habib Khan Totakhil, a seasoned journalist whose career has been dedicated to documenting the realities of Afghanistan, a former correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, founder of Afghan Peace Watch, and recipient of multiple prestigious awards. John has tirelessly worked to ensure that the world doesn't turn a blind eye to the plight of the people of Afghanistan. So this was a brief bio. Habib John, welcome to the show. To start, can you give us or share a bit about your journey in journalism, how it began, and how your experiences reporting in Afghanistan have shaped, your perspective today?
Thank you so much, Kumayl, for the kind introduction, and Zoubair for arranging this. So I started my journalistic career from Afghanistan Times. It's a local English newspaper in Afghanistan. And then I moved to the Wall Street Journal. I worked for them as their Afghanistan correspondent until 2018. And through that time, I was mostly, obviously, like if you're a journalist in Afghanistan, you're automatically more focused on security and politics and terrorism. So those were the main topics I've been covering in Afghanistan. And I've traveled extensively to all provinces of Afghanistan. And I could say that I'm one of the very few journalists in Afghanistan who have embedded with the different warring parties in Afghanistan, starting from the Afghan security forces and then the U.S. military forces, including the special forces, and then also the Taliban. So I was one of the very few journalists who, in early days, who have embedded with the Taliban and saw the insurgency from within. How do they work as an insurgent group? And then in 2020, after the Doha deal, we started monitoring the so-called reduction in violence in Afghanistan through our nonprofit organization that I founded at that time called Afghan Peace Watch. And then after the collapse, we registered that as a nonprofit 501c3 in the United States. So now I work with my team in Afghanistan, inside Afghanistan, and also outside Afghanistan. We have a relatively small team, but we do maintain our network of journalists in Afghanistan that we report data from. And we focus on human rights violation, monitoring human rights violation, armed groups, weapons dynamics, and as well as the terrorism and armed resistance and the Taliban government.
Wow, thank you. And we're going to come back to the Afghan Peace Watch organization again, just in more detail. But before that, I just wanted to also mention, the fact that you received the Rumi Award for Best International Reporter in Afghanistan in 2014, that's a big deal, right? So that's something that's one of the main reasons why we wanted to have this discussion with you. And specifically regarding journalism under the Taliban currently in Afghanistan. What do you think about that in regards to the importance of, I guess, independent journalism now that the Taliban are in power, and I guess risks faced by journalists and media organizations, as well as things such as censorship, propaganda on reporting, things like that? So if you can touch on that area, that would be great.
One of the greatest achievements of the post-2001 Afghanistan was obviously the free media in Afghanistan and the growth of media organization and journalists in Afghanistan in the past 2 decades. That was one of the biggest accomplishments of the US-backed government in Afghanistan. That unfortunately, after the return of the Taliban, we've lost that freedom in Afghanistan. So we can say that there's no free media whatsoever under the Taliban because they don't believe in the concept of the flow of free information. They do not. They see that in contradiction to their core beliefs because they see that as un-Islamic. They see that the flow of information should be controlled by their so-called Islamic system. So it should not corrupt the society according to them. So for that, they've a lot of religious reasons for it too. to censor the flow of information and to censor the media freedom in Afghanistan. And they've been doing so. So right now, under the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan, most of the media organizations that were working there have already collapsed due to censorship, Taliban's controlling also lack of finances, and those that are operating under the Taliban, they're heavily censored. And we've seen the instances. For instance, I'll mention Ariana, Tulu, Shamshad, like these major TV that were established during the Republic in Afghanistan and are still operating under the Taliban. Their news and their information and their broadcasting is totally controlled. They do not have no freedom whatsoever in terms of publishing news. And they're deliberately, the Taliban are forcing them, and they have no choice. I don't blame them. They want to survive in Afghanistan. If they want to operate, and then all these media owners, they've invested quite a lot of money in their outlets. So if they want to survive, they have to listen to what the Taliban says, and they have to obey the censorship that the Taliban introduced. That's why under the Taliban, it's even more important that independent journalists, independent media organizations should be supported in Afghanistan. And there is a sense of urgency too, because all the media outlets are already being censored. So the flow of accurate information from Afghanistan faces a lot of hurdles. For the reason to fight that out and keep this flow of information going from Afghanistan, it's very necessary for independent journalists, independent media organizations to operate that and to be supported.
Thank you, Habib John. That's it's very crucial. All those points on censorship, it really highlights and underlines the significance of organizations like yours, like Afghan Peace Watch. And I want to come back to that. How does Afghan Peace Watch overcome the sort of restrictions and the specific restrictions to ensure that the truth does get out? So what are the methods of verification, let's say, and so on, or collecting of the information itself?
So when we started Afghan Peace Watch in 2020, we registered with the Ministry of Economy under the Republic of Afghanistan. And after the return of the Taliban, they asked all NGOs to get re-verify their registration with the Taliban Ministry of Economy. So we didn't do it because that would jeopardize, compromise our whole unique methodology that we had adapted after the collapse.
Wait, well, why? What did that mean? What did it mean if, I know that I heard the news at the time, but what did it mean? What were the kind of changes that were immediate if you had to register, let's say, your NGO, if you did go through that process of registering with them?
Yeah, so our unique methodology is that we are using it on Peace Watch, that we're keeping people working for us, we are keeping their identities hidden and kept, right? So what the Taliban wanted, forcing these kind of NGOs and media organizations to re-register with their economy, with that they can access and control who work for all these different organizations in Afghanistan. So they have their eyes on everybody. And what we do, our methodologies, plus we use very secure communication tools. Communicating, we don't use like the standard communication tools. We use
WhatsApp and things like that.
Yeah, we don't use WhatsApp in those things for communication. We use very secure communication app to communicate with people, and we keep their identity hidden. And also, how do we collect this information? So we have people all over Afghanistan, and we have more than 200 sources in all 34 provinces of Afghanistan. And those sources include local journalists, activists, women's rights activists, former members of provincial council, former members of parliament, former members of local government. So those are the kind of people, and also the Taliban themselves. So local Taliban authorities too. So we talk to those people and we give our information to them. We don't rely on information provided only by the Taliban. So whenever there is an incident, we go and we cross-check those information with local sources I mentioned before. So for the reason to not compromise our team in Afghanistan, we did not register with the Taliban's Ministry of Economy, because that would have compromised the whole operation and would have made it extremely difficult for us to collect data, accurate data from Afghanistan.
Right. And regarding the challenges of journalists in Afghanistan, I have seen obviously journalists getting jailed. There's been instances of, we've seen reports where they've gotten beaten on the street, jailed.
Actually, brother Habib has gotten a threat from a government, right? From the government of Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken, yourself, right? They issued a
Tons of times, many times.
Yeah. So do you have stories, or how serious is that? Basically journalists being under threat by whether it's the Taliban or other countries, and we've seen the shutdown of radio stations and things like that. So can you go into more depth on one of those things?
Yeah, we have seen the Taliban has a track record when it comes to journalists. We remember Naqshbandi in the early days of Taliban's resurgence, that they beheaded Naqshbandi, the Afghan journalist. I think, if I'm not wrong, it was 2006 or 2000, around those years. So, and after that too, the Taliban were accused of killing and murdering many journalists. They attacked TVs like Shamshad. They attacked the Tulu TV vehicle that killed several journalists, and they have been behind the torture and killing and abduction of journalists before they returned to power. And when they returned to power, we saw so many instances that Taliban have tortured journalists, including, for instance, the journalists that were working for Iqla, the Hazara journalists. They were tortured by the Taliban, and their story was public, and there were other instances too. So, when it comes to censoring information and then censoring journalists, the Taliban are really brutal, and they have proved that they are capable of killing journalists. They are capable of torturing and abducting journalists, and they're doing it, and they've not changed their policy. So when they threat journalists, that those threats should be taken seriously, because they do have that track record, and they've not changed their policy about threatening and torturing and killing journalists. So the current regime working as a journalist under the current regime in Afghanistan is perhaps the most difficult job for journalists ever, especially for Afghan journalists who already struggle with a lot of other problems. Sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, this reminds me of, or it brought something to mind as far as specific challenges, right? Of course, the general situation, as you've shared these valuable insights, it is more so probably the most challenging country to be reporting on in perhaps in the world. Maybe North Korea, or I don't know where else would be more difficult. But it brings me to another important topic. And as the name of our podcast, is Radio Resistance, to the topic of resistance movements. How do you approach covering groups like the National Resistance Front, for example, while maintaining that journalistic, let's say, objectivity as well, right?
Yeah. So, when it comes to news and armed resistance, as I mentioned before, we do have a team in Afghanistan. We have this one journalist who's, and I'm not going to name the province, but he's based in one of the northern province. So he talks to his local sources within the resistance group when things happen. For instance, when there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation, when the Taliban killed some of the resistance members, extrajudicial killing. So we did reach out to our own sources, verifying those information on the ground from all local sources to verify if those extrajudicial killings were taking place for real. And they did confirm that those were not rumors, and that did happen on the ground. So when it comes to specific news on involving resistance, so we do cross-check all the information with local sources, with different sources. So our journalists are obviously they're connected with local resistance groups, and as well as the local Taliban authority.
Okay, and do you think that these resistance movements are getting enough attention globally? And like, what role does journalism play in shaping that narrative?
Unfortunately, right now, like I've been tweeting once in a while about the attacks by the resistance groups, and I see most of my followers are obviously English-speaking followers, so I get all these comments on my Twitter. Is there is there people fighting the Taliban against the Taliban? Who are these people? The thing is that after the withdrawal of the American forces in Afghanistan, this whole narrative of the war has ended being repeated over and over in media. So everybody thinks that, okay, there's no war in Afghanistan. Everybody likes the Taliban, and the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan. So there's no war. But while in fact, the conflict has never ended in Afghanistan. The American involvement in Afghanistan ended, but that does not mean that the war has ended in Afghanistan. The war has continued, and it's the volume of attacks have decreased. Obviously, there are not as many attacks as there were when the Taliban was fighting against the Republic, but the war has never stopped. It has never ended. It has never gone through the reconciliation and peace process. So there are people fighting, but people do not know about it internationally and globally. But it also is the I think a lot of international media, a lot of like these pro-Taliban apologists and with so-called experts repeating this rhetoric that there is nobody fighting up the Taliban. The people are tired of fighting. And also, one more thing is that if you look at the Taliban's resurgence after 2001, it took them around 5 years to get to where the resistance movements are today. So the resistance movements have outpaced the Taliban's recruit in terms of attacks that are happening in Afghanistan right now. So I did a quick research about the attacks done by Afghanistan Freedom Front and Afghanistan National Resistance Front. There were 14 attacks in one. This was a couple of weeks ago, I guess. So there were 14 attacks in different provinces in 1 week by both the resistance groups, and that's quite a number for just 1 week. While a year ago or 2 years ago there were barely attacks, those many attacks even in a month. So what I believe is that this momentum's gonna go up. The number of attacks is gonna go up. People are gonna increasingly be upset, and they'll hold grudges, and they will have no other options but to join one of these resistance groups that are fighting the Taliban. Because if you look at the Taliban insurgency, at the beginning when they started grouping, there were people who started joining the Taliban insurgency for so many reasons. And one of the main reasons that people would go and join the Taliban were because they were upset with the government. Either they were oppressed by local warlords, they've had some problems with some police commanders or some like military commanders, so they had no other options. For instance, I'll give an example of Kunduz. In Kunduz, in 2009, a local warlord Mir Alam, he massacred Pashtun residents of Kunduz outskirts. Around 30 people were killed. Those people were not Taliban, but
When was this?
this was in Kunduz in 2009. So in 2009, the commander who killed these people, his name was Mir Alam. It's documented. It's well documented by a lot of organizations. So this guy with his militia, this commander, he goes to a Pashtun village and he kills all these people, including women and children. And then what happens? And he is this commander. He represents the authority of the government in that specific area, right? So when these people are killed, these Pashtun villagers, they're killed, and they cannot ask for justice because who would they ask justice? Who would they ask this commander to kill them because he's the representative of the government. So they were left with no other option but to join the Taliban, and that was the beginning of the Taliban's infiltration in Kunduz. That Kunduz became one of the first provinces that fell to Taliban, 2015 and also 2016. So now looking at comparing that situation with today's situation, the Taliban are pushing everybody so hard when it comes to women, media, minorities, the non-Pashtun ethnic groups, the Hazaras, the Tajik, and also the educated, the non-Taliban Pashtuns. So they're all pushing all these people so further that they will have no other option but to join the resistance groups. And that's happening already. And it will just become more and more that people are going to join these resistance group because they would have no other option but to fight the Taliban.
And those parallels are very interesting. I never actually thought about some of those. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, which was the pace of the attacks of the current resistance versus when you compared it to the Taliban's insurgency, I think something interesting about that is that at the same time, the Taliban had backing, right? We know Pakistan's role throughout the 20 years backing the Taliban. So they had a major power funneling them with fighters and weapons and logistics. Whereas the resistance currently doesn't have a backer like that. It's whatever they have of their own stockpiles of weapons and whatever cash that they have. So I think that considering that they don't have any major power backing them and that they've kept this pace, I think that's an interesting situation. And eventually, I do think there will be a backer. And I think that then, like you said, we'll probably see a surge in these attacks. Or just if the Taliban's funding is cut off, that itself will also, change the dynamics.
Yeah,
of the
it
fight.
also balances out like the fact that the former government had the support of NATO and as well as all these other countries. And now the Taliban has the support of only Pakistan, right? So it sort of balances that out.
That's
So
true.
if you know what I mean. Because back in the government was supported by NATO, US, and everybody, and the Taliban was supported by Pakistan. Now that the Taliban do not have any support, the resistance groups don't have any support like the Taliban did, but the Taliban also don't have that kind of support that the Republic
That's true.
had, right? So it sort of balances that out. But I do believe that the resistance going to grow, even like in the coming year or two, and eventually I think they will find regional and also global supporters. But especially, I think with the Trump's new administration, especially with the picks for the NSA, Mike Waltz, for the other security ministries of the United States. I think those people, and we know that all those people were involved in Afghanistan and they know the dynamics in Afghanistan very well. They know what Pakistan's doing. Mike Waltz was a big supporter of the sanctioned Pakistan campaign too. And he's also a major supporter of NARIF and also the Afghanistan United Front. He's friend with Samir. He's friend with the NARIF members and leaders. So I think means that there will be a shift in the U.S. policy toward Afghanistan, and that would not mean that that the United States is going to send troops back to Afghanistan, boots on the ground. Nobody's advocating for that, and there is no appetite for that even within the United States. So nobody's going to send troops to Afghanistan again. But what's going to happen is that the Taliban do not agree to sit with the Afghans and to form an inclusive government that represent all Afghans. I think there would be a shift in these policy when it comes to resistance groups. So politically supporting them and probably like financially supporting them. And to be honest, like in this era, all the resistance group need is political support from the United States and from these countries, and as well as like high tech weaponry like
Yeah.
drones and things like that. That doesn't necessarily, for that you don't necessarily need a lot of territorial cross-border support. It's good to have cross-border support for that sort of operations, but it's not extremely necessary.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, when I said to cut off the funding, obviously that would be big. But the other thing that Taliban also have is they're sitting on that huge stockpile of weapons and equipment left behind by the U.S.
Yeah, let me tell you something more. So the Taliban are not only sitting on the stockpiles of weapons. They're buying the weapons right now. And they are buying weapons. And do you know how they're buying those weapons? They're using the drug. So they're using the drug money to buy weapons because the money they collect through the Ministry of Finance,
Could you, Abib John, can you speak about that? Because there are a lot of people, and I personally have even been asked this question here in the United States of America by many of my American compatriots. They'll be like, "Oh, well, we've heard that, opium has been outlawed by the Taliban." Similar to another thing, which we won't get into, but like that whole thing of them not being into bachabozi and all that. But as far as the poppy cultivation and opium is concerned, I think from what I've collected from the research the reporting that's available, it seems like to a degree, they did stop this, but it's all a PR stunt, and solely for optics because it's different drugs that they are dealing with now. Could
Yeah,
you provide some deeper
So,
insight?
with that, add that the Taliban did issue the decree to ban the poppy cultivation. They were successful to greater extent in terms of uh, preventing people from cultivating poppy. So I've had friends who have traveled to Helmand, to Farah, to southern western Afghanistan, and they've confirmed this truth. The poppy cultivation does not happen at that scale that used to. But why the Taliban banned this? So I have a different reason for it. I think the reason is not that the Taliban are against poppy cultivation. I think one of the reasons that the Taliban banned poppy cultivation was that they have huge stocks of opium themselves. So when they banned the poppy cultivation in Afghanistan, the prices skyrocketed. So the prices went up so crazy that the Taliban are now making even more and more money. And we know that the
The
Taliban
supply and demand.
have already had this monopoly for the drug market. We did a recent study, with the small arms survey. The study is not published yet. It will be published probably in the next couple of weeks or so. And we found out one of the findings of that study was that there are still open air markets in Afghanistan that sells drugs and weapons, and those weapons, even drones. You can those drug markets are operating with certain level of uh, regulations from the Taliban. So these local Taliban commanders, they're taking money, their part, uh, from the local dealers, and they're allowing these drug markets to sell weapons and also sell drugs. Just not happening only in Nangarhar. So this one market, I'll mention the name of that market is Totomela. That's an open air market for drug and also for weapons in Nangarhar, Shirzad district. And then there are markets like that in Sangin and Helmand too, that people still sell drugs and weapons under the Taliban control. And they have allowed those weapons market to operate.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. Speaking of Nangarhar, there might be some connection here. I wanted to also ask you about groups such as ISKP and also the TTP, right? In regards to their existence in these regions, can you give us a little insight about that? I think you've done some work on that, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, sure. So after the Taliban's return, there were 3,000 ISKP fighters, members that were released from prison, and then the Taliban killed and arrested many of them. And the Taliban local authorities, especially in Nangarhar, they were accused of many extrajudicial killing, dumping the bodies of these suspected alleged ISKP fighters and dumpsters and like water cannons and things like that. And they also did a very severe crackdown on the Salafist madrasas and the Salafist minorities in Nangar. According to this one Salafist group, they killed more than 400 Salafist scholars in Nangarhar in Kunar. So that sort of forced the local Salafists to close down Salafist madrasas and also moved to Pakistan. This after the Taliban's return, Islamic State also moved a strategic. They made a strategic relocation from Nangarhar to Kunar. So the Islamic State is now the Islamic State Khorasan is now more active in Kunar than there in Nangarhar, especially in Chowki district of Kunar province. There are a few other districts there in the Pech Dara, which is like but also the Chowki district in Kunar province have become one of their main strongholds, and they are constantly attacking the Taliban and using the same Taliban tactics against the Taliban. So they are doing a lot of ID attacks, they're doing ambushes, they're also doing, and they're also in control of certain areas in Kunar. So, and the number of ISKP fighters have also now is around 6,000 to 8,000 people altogether in Afghanistan. And the interesting thing is that I see the Taliban's been trying it, and there are some pro-Taliban journalists who are part of that propaganda that they are linking ISKP to NRF.
Yeah.
But I've seen that they're pushing this very consciously and very deliberately. The Taliban is doing this because the Taliban know if they push this narrative that ISKP is linked to. They achieve two things. One thing, they can openly just kill whoever they want and can label them as KP. So this is even like the international community, the United States and NATO's and Europeans, they wouldn't care much if they kill ISKP, right? ISKP members. They do it for this reason. And second reason, they do this for is to sort of delegitimize what the resistance group stands for, especially the they've been doing this very systematic, but and saying that the members of ISKP they're Tajik and they're like most of the ISKP members comes from Panjshir in Takhar in like Badakhshan in these provinces, which is not true because most members, the Tajik members of ISKP, they're not even Tajik of Afghanistan. They're Tajik of Tajikistan. So they're not even Afghan citizens. And when it comes to like the regular members of ISKP, most of those ISKP members are from Orakzak agency. Most of those ISKP members are from the Momand agency, are from across the journey. And on this side, the Salafists, they do have some sympathizers and supporters within the Salafist community in Afghanistan's Kunar and Nangarhar and parts of Nuristan. And also what the ISKP does to the Taliban is as the Taliban were doing to ISKP. So, to the Republic, I mean. During the Republic, the Taliban had a whole shadow government, right? So they had provincial governor, the Taliban themselves, provincial police chiefs, and all these different commissions. And now ISKP is doing the same to the Taliban. So they have their own shadow governors. They have their own shadow commissions, military commissions, security commissions, judiciary, everything for most of the provinces of Afghanistan. And I have that list of all their shadow governors. And most of those people, they're not even Tajik. So this whole narrative that the Taliban are pushing against linking NRA to ISKP is to sort of have a free hand in dealing with the member opposition resistance.
Can I just make one? I want to mention one thing in regards to the Taliban targeting people and labeling them as ISKP or Daesh, right? I actually know a story of this. An extended family member in Mazar Sharif, actually. My mom was talking to someone on the phone the other day, and she told me the story right after she got off the phone. She said they killed the son of so-and-so, who we know. He's, again, an extended family member. And the Taliban basically chased him down for some, I forgot what it was, something that petty crime or something. He got into a scuffle with a Taliban member. They end up chasing him down and gunning him down. They killed him. And then they reported to the town that we killed a Daesh member. Nobody, it's the furthest thing from the truth, because he wasn't involved in he wasn't a military person. He wasn't a fighter of any type. He was just a regular, I think, shop owner or something like that. He worked in a shop. So these things, if it happens against local, ordinary people, you can bet that it's happening against, people in Kabul and other areas, and they're labeling them as Daesh.
Well, let me tell you why they do it. Because ISKP, labeling people as ISKP is easy for the Taliban to kill. So if they say, okay, this guy works for NRF, they wouldn't have that sort of they just kill somebody working for another, there would be some sort of backlash, right?
Of
But
course,
if they
yeah.
kill somebody, labeling them that they're just housekeeping, nobody's gonna care because it will be, oh, they're terrorists or killing terrorists, right? So people wouldn't care much, and there wouldn't be a lot of backlash globally or regionally or nationally. But if they do that, labeling all these people who stand against them as SKP, so they have a free hand. And that's exactly the reason they're doing it. And they don't even have like logical backing for it. The only thing that I've seen through Taliban that they want to prove this point is that one video from I think it was in France. I
Oh,
remember
yeah.
a guy with the resistance flag saying that we should join ISKP, and that's the whole argument is based on that video and a few other things like that that doesn't justify that ISKP is linked to Narek. So I've even had this conversation with one of the American veterans. Even she was thinking that Narek is ISKP, and I had to talk to her like, no, this is what the Taliban are. And it's not only the Taliban. The thing is that some so-called independent journalists are also deliberately promoting this narrative that ISKP and are the same people, which is extremely dangerous. And we know who those people are because they have been just advocating and whitewashing the Taliban the day one.
I mean, that's such an important point. Such an important point about how, they're essentially the Taliban is scapegoating other terrorist groups. It's interesting. I can never forget that even in 2021, in August, the experts were all saying this. With these terror groups, they work with one another one day, and on another day they may be enemies. But for the most part, they're one and the same.
Yeah, let me just make a comment there. So between ISKP and TTP, for instance, we observed one of our key findings. We did another report with the Afghan Witness, with the Afghan Peace Watch with Afghan Witness, and in one of the key findings
Oh
was
yeah,
that,
can you tell us, by the way, what is Afghan Witness? Because I see you're involved with them as well, right?
they're a different organization.
Okay.
They funded this project that we worked with, we worked on. It's the evolution of ISKP in art. They one of the findings we had in that report was that the TTP are collaborating with the ISKP. So the ISKP members, some of ISKP members are sheltered by across the Duran line in eastern Afghanistan. So that's very true what you said before, that these terrorist groups, one day they're fighting each other, second day they're not fighting, they're allies. Also, it's very complex. They're in, like, internal dynamics. How, for instance, if we look at what the TTP is doing to Pakistan, and then Pakistan is also supporting ISKP, and then the TTP is also supported by Taliban, and then TTP is also fighting in Pakistan. So it's very complex, the whole situation. But at the end of the day, these terrorist organizations, regardless of their ideologies, regardless of their political associations and political beliefs, at the end of the day, they do have a lot of commonalities, and they have a lot of common ground, and they do collaborate with each other on so many layers.
Yeah, just the fact that you said that ISKP and TTP are working with each other, or they support each other in certain regards. I mean, that link is there with the Taliban as well, because we know that the TTP pledged allegiance to the Taliban when they took over, right? So it's like you can't separate them. There's always going to be some degree, but when it's convenient for them to work with each other, right? When
Or
the
a
day comes,
faction among
or a
them,
faction.
right?
Yeah, because when the day comes, though, like if let's say the resistance really starts making a push and they're now becoming a major threat to the Taliban's, clutch on power, I can see these other groups now be like, okay, well, remember we already pledged allegiance to you guys and we supported you when you took over, and now it's time for us to team up. So, because at the end of the day, the ideology is all the same. So
I didn't add that for a minute. The Taliban's biggest fear is also ISKP right now. If you study the Taliban's social media narrative that they're pushing, especially in Arabic and English, they are trying to prove that they're better and more brutal Muslim than the ISKP. So when they did this execution, this man in Turkey a few days ago, there were some Taliban accounts that were pushing this execution, saying, look at ISKP, they tell us we don't enforce Sharia law. See, we enforce Sharia law. So there's this competition between ISKP and the Taliban and who's more brutal, who's more
I've
savage.
seen a bit of that. I've seen a bit of that on social media. That's funny you mentioned that, man.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the Taliban are trying to portray themselves as more brutal and more Islamic in a sense, that they are cutting people's hair off, they're cutting people's like hands off, they're whipping people, lashing people, and like stoning people and things like that to prove to the SKP, because their biggest nightmare is losing this narrative that they are the true Muslims and they are the true representatives of Islam all over the world. And I also studied through our research, we also studied the use of the terminology by SKP against the Taliban. So whatever terms the Taliban were using against the Republic, the ISKP has adopted the same terminology using them against the Taliban, calling them apostates, calling them working and collaborating with the crusaders and with the infidels and like doing the Doha Pact and all those things.
That's what I had seen. It was one of them talking about that. They're like, oh, well, you guys worked with the Americans, so you're not the Islamist. You're not the real terrorist in what we understand from it.
Yeah. That's and it's very interesting. The language, the terminology, the rhetoric that they're pushing is very, very similar with the. So in the post 2001 setting, there were a lot of mujahideen, right? Sahabis. So the Taliban were sort of telling the mujahideen that you've become so corrupt that you may deal with these with the Americans, right? And now Daesh SKP is telling the same thing to Taliban, that you guys are corrupt. Now we are the true Muslims in the world. I mean, that's why it's very important for resistance groups that are not terrorist organizations like SKP to distance themselves as much as they can from these religious fanatics, because that in any sense, these resistance groups become closer to these Islamist radical groups that would only hurt the goal of the resistance group, whether it's in Arab, it's a Afghanistan Freedom Front, or whatever other organization there are.
Before we wrap up over here, I'm John. This whole conversation just reminded me of a couple moments that I think that tie in perfectly with what we're discussing today. One of them, the first was back in August 2021 during the fall of Kabul, a time, when the flood of information and misinformation specifically was so overwhelming. I remember the specific moment that there was a claim circulating that the NRF was somehow responsible for an explosion. I think it might have been the Abbey Gate thing. I don't know exactly, but you were doing your job, man. You amplified a report at that time. And I was, in my full Twitter warrior mode. I had said something about that. But, I wanted to say I really respected how, you quickly acted. That's when I first met you, when I first got to know about you and how you acted when the facts were clarified. And then, you ended up chatting in the DMs about it a little bit. Looking back, it's just a bit funny, and it speaks to the intensity of that moment, then how hard it is for journalists like yourself, to accurately report in real-time chaos, right? That's what's happening here. Honestly, I just want to thank you for the work that you do to amplify the realities of Afghanistan under, these challenging circumstances. Also, one quick anecdote that we spoke about before recording, but I think you could both look back on and reflect a little differently. The whole ban Taliban campaign, right? You were the one who started it, and it really took off as a way to, push back against the Taliban's ability to use social media platforms for their propaganda. And then about a year later, I think it was about a year later, I kind of helped revive the hashtag a little bit, and then we staged a protest outside of the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco, calling for the Taliban accounts to be banned. At the time, it felt like the move to counter their narratives and looking back, as I mentioned, we spoke about this, but especially with Elon Musk's, focus on free speech and just anti-censorship, I've found myself with mixed feelings. On one hand, yes, we're resisting harmful propaganda, but also it's very important. And, I've come to see the value of these open platforms for all voices, even the ones I guess we disagree with. What's your perspective on that campaign now? Do you think it's possible to strike a balance between resisting harmful narratives and supporting free speech?
I think that the reason that Elon Musk has allowed all these groups, extremist groups, to have their accounts and push their own thoughts and ideology, I sort of get it, because as he's put it, that he wants Twitter to be the collective, memory of the collective consciousness of the humanity. So I get that, and I think it makes sense. But also on the other side, on the other aspect, like imagine we didn't have Taliban and Twitter, so we have rethinking that whole that Taliban campaign. I think it's, in a sense, it's good that we do have Taliban on Twitter and we do have media so people can see them, what kind of creatures they're, what kind of logic they do. They have any logic at all? Do they have any sort of justification for the actions that they are doing? Stuff and for their very backward thinking and all the misogyny, the oppression that they're doing on the people. How do they talk about it? So I think it's good to hear from Taliban's perspective. Look at them so people can judge for themselves too. If I want, if it's up to me, obviously I would ban the Taliban right away, but it's not up to me. It's up to Elon Musk, and I think I understand his position on this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you, Habib John. Yep, go ahead. So, John.
Do we want to close this out, or I guess just on ending this, if you can offer any advice to those who are using platforms like
kind of running low too, and I get a message there. So I missed through.
Yeah, just for those who their activism on Twitter and for journalists in
social
general.
media, yeah,
social media.
Let's say the social media activists, journalists, those who are following, reporting on Afghanistan.
Yeah,
on social
I
media.
think one general advice for all Afghans is that it's impossible for all 40 million people of Afghanistan to gather. And
we still got you.
I got a call.
Yeah, we still got you. I think.
Cut it off. So let me just make
No worries.
So one general advice that I have for all the people of Afghanistan: it's impossible to make everybody, all the 40 million people, agree on everything. But we can agree on things like, do we want Afghanistan free of Taliban? With a few very simple things like do we want everybody in Afghanistan to be equal? Do you want women and girls to go to school, to go to universities? I think we should find this common ground, and we do have that common ground among all Afghans, and we should get together and unite against the Taliban. Whether and it's not just the job of a certain resistance group; it's the job of every Afghan, regardless of their profession. If they're journalists, if they're activists, if they're from all walks of life, it's the job of every Afghan woman and man to speak out, to stand against the tyranny and oppression of the Taliban, and work for a free Afghanistan, a free democratic Afghanistan where everybody has the same rights.
Well said.
Absolutely, Habib John. The work you're doing is vital, not just for Afghanistan, but for anyone who believes in the power, for truth and accountability. Thank you for your tireless efforts and for joining us to share your story. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Radio Resistance Podcast. As always, we hope these conversations inspire you to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay resistant. Until next time.